Hi again then guys, and welcome to the 95th episode of B-Road Ballers, once again featuring a vehicle which is no longer on Gran Turismo but was back on Gran Turismo 2. And that's the latest that we've had it on the game, and that's a shame. With some cars, you can do without them. They may be good, they may be not so good, but people don't generally miss them. Other cars, though, really do deserve to return. And there are some cars for different people which really do stand out from older Gran Turismo games in that regard. From Gran Turismo 2, for instance, the most common one is my favourite, the Espace F1. You've got others as well, like the Suzuki Cultus, the Lotus Elise GT1, the Vectors, the Venturis. From games like Gran Turismo 4, you've got stuff like the Ford Model T, the Patent Motorwagen, and the Daimler Motor Carriage, that kind of stuff. And they're all great vehicles. Others, though, have a smaller but very fervent fan base, and this is one of those vehicles. You don't hear people clamouring to have this car brought back to Gran Turismo in general, but those who do want it back really want it back. Now, for those who are unfamiliar with the vehicle, the car in the game, at least the version of the game which I have, is just called the Nissan Sunny 1991. That's a relatively understated title, and I personally think that they did that quite deliberately, because the actual fact is that on Gran Turismo 2, this is something of a sleeper car. It's a Nissan, as I said, but you can't buy it in the new car dealership. You can only buy it every so often in the used car section. And if I remember correctly, it costs somewhere around 7 or 8 grand, and obviously it depends on which used car you buy. Now, what do you actually get for that money? Because at the end of the day, the Nissan Sunny isn't exactly known for performance, generally speaking. It's kind of like a Ford Focus or a Toyota Prius. It's known for being just a car to get you from A to B. Well, that's not the case with this one, because this car is essentially Nissan's answer to icons such as the Honda Type R, the Ford RS Cosworth, and various others in the hot hatch category in particular, because this is very much so the Skyline GTR of hatchbacks. It really is. It's an all-wheel drive hatch, and there aren't that many of those, especially back then, and the engine is a 2-litre turbo, so it's a decent size for a relatively small car, and fully tuned. This has some serious numbers, even by Gran Turismo standards. 414 horsepower, 341 pound-feet of torque. Those are good numbers to be working with. In fact, they're not far off the kind of numbers that you'd expect from something like an Audi S4 or a Ford Focus RS on newer Gran Turismo games. Now that, from a car that only costs around 8 grand in a used car section, is a pretty good deal. Now, the fact that it weighs a little bit more than you might expect does slightly hinder its ability. Now, it's still a fantastic performance car. The all-wheel drive makes it great as a rally car as well, and the fact that it has over 400 horsepower means that on Gran Turismo 2, it's among the fastest hatchbacks in the game. It may even be the fastest hatchback in the game in a straight line. I've never actually compared them all. But it does weigh 1,122 kilos after the full weight loss package, and that's not as impressive as you might hope. Looking at the car, you'd probably assume that it weighs around 1,000 kilos. So the fact that it weighs around 120 kilos more than that could be a hindrance. And as I mentioned just now, it kind of is. Because although it is very fast in a straight line, definitely, around corners you can definitely also feel that weight. It's not bad handling, not by any stretch, and the fact that the car is still relatively small means that the weight doesn't feel too bad. But it definitely doesn't feel as light on its feet as, for instance, the Micra Super Turbo, which we reviewed last week. And obviously it's a bigger car with more power, so it's not going to feel exactly as good or exactly the same. But you would expect a vehicle like this, of its kind of size and the low centre of gravity that it has, to be quite nimble. And although it's not bad around corners, it's not as nimble as you might hope. It handles in a fairly similar way to something like the Audi S4 or the Golf R32 on Gran Turismo 6, for instance. So it's not bad, definitely not, and it could easily give any of those hot hatches a great run for their money on Gran Turismo 6, or even beyond that if we get more hot hatches on Gran Turismo Sport. Now the horsepower per tonne is still very high for a hot hatch at 369, because although the weight is a little bit higher than you might hope, so is the power, but not than you might hope, more than you might expect. 414 horsepower really is the number that I keep going back to with this car, because by Gran Turismo 2 standards, where most vehicles don't end up, really, with that much power. Most vehicles, when you tune them, especially street cars, don't have a huge jump in performance and power. So for this one to go from 220 horsepower to 414 is a pretty decent jump to have, especially for a hatchback. Now, of course, it doesn't have a PP level or a class like we now have on Gran Turismo, but it will make a very good addition to the garage of anyone who's looking to race something both on and off-road. But that's it for this pick overall. I'll see you guys next time, and as always, thanks for watching.